Welcome to the very first author interaction of the 2022 NLF Reading Challenge. The NLF Reading Challenge, in its second edition this year, is a 4-month-long reading event from March to June 2022. It involves students between 10 to 13 years of age and is open to participants on the competitive and the non-competitive tracks. We have students from across India participating in the challenge. For those of you who wish to purchase the titles on the reading list for the challenge this year, we've also partnered with independent bookstores across the country. We'll post their details out on the chat box soon. In addition to fun book-based activities and regular author interactions, the challenge will conclude with a quiz competition that will see the 3 best teams win gold, silver, and bronze engraved trophies respectively, certificates of achievement, and a great set of books. Before we dive into the interaction, here are a few quick housekeeping notes. Please use the Q&A box to type out your questions or your responses to what's being discussed during the session. If you're a student, a teacher, or a school librarian, please mention the name of your school along with your question as well. Today, we are privileged to have with us the author Donna Barba Higuera, who will be discussing her book, The Last Cuentista, which has been awarded the prestigious 2022 Newbery Medal and the Pura Belpre Children's Author Award this year. She is also the author of Lupe Wong Won't Dance, which won the Sid Fleischman Award and the Pura Belpre Honor Award in 2020, as well as the book El Cucuy is Scared Too. Welcome, Donna. We're very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I am coming from very far away in Redmond, Washington in the United States, and I am in a bookstore. I just had a Newbery event with Tay Keller, who won the Newbery Medal last year, and it was quite a surprise. There was a video with 5 or 6 past Newbery winners who were congratulating me. So it's been a wonderful evening, and it's evening here. I know it's morning for you, but this is a great way to end my night. So I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Donna. What a lovely event that sounds like, the one at your bookstore.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
So Donna, I guess we could start off if you could do a short reading of your book from us, and then we could jump right into the questions.
Very good. I'm going to read from the beginning of the book, which is when Earth is ending and Petra is having a last conversation with her grandmother, who she is leaving behind. Chapter 1. Lita tosses another piñon log onto the fire. Sweet smoke drifts past us into the starry sky. Her knees crack as she sits back down on the blanket next to me. The cup of hot chocolate with cinnamon she's made sits untouched this time. I have something I want you to take with you on your trip, Petra. Lita reaches into her sweater pocket. Since I won't be there for your 13th birthday, she holds out a silver pendant in the shape of a sun. Its center is filled with a flat black stone. If you hold it up to the sun, its light glows through the obsidian. I take it from her hand and hold it up, but there is no sun, only the moon. Sometimes I try to imagine I can see things I really can't, but I'm sure a faint glow filters through the middle of the stone. I move the pendant back and forth. It disappears completely when I move it too far from the center of my vision. When I look back, Lita is motioning to an identical pendant around her neck. You know, she says, Yucatecos believe obsidian holds magic, a doorway to bring lost ones together. She purses her lips, her brown skin wrinkles toward her nose like cracked bark on a tree. They shouldn't force me to go, I say. You have to, Petra. Lita looks away for a long time before speaking again. Children are not meant to be separated from their parents. Your dad's parent, he should stay with you then. We all should. Even as I say it, I know I sound like a little kid. She laughs a deep, soft chuckle. I'm too old to travel so far. But for you, Dios mío, a new planet, how exciting. So I'm going to stop there because I know we have about a half hour, and I want to make sure we have time for questions.
Thanks so much. That was lovely. Such an evocative beginning for that story. So,
thank you.
Donna, one of the key things that the book highlights is it gives oral storytelling traditions pride of place. For instance, in the chapter where Petra is working with her father and they go gemstone hunting, and they're looking for jasper. He talks about how each piece of jasper has its own spirit, that they're not meant to match the others and be identical, but complement one another because differences make things beautiful as a whole. It's a small object which is connected to a small moment, which holds a big idea within it. Is this something that appeals to you about stories in general?
Absolutely. And I think that, as we all know, the beads represent humans, and they represent how we all have our unique stories, each and every one of us. Even if you're from the same culture or the same race, we all have our own unique background and unique story, and we're not meant to all be the same. And I wanted to show how we should have pride in all that we are, in each of us, in our individual family stories of our parents and our grandparents and our ancestors, and to be proud of those. But yeah, I think it's important for every person to feel that way. But also, as a writer, I love that I can share stories from my own personal background that often, maybe when I was younger, I was embarrassed or ashamed to share. And it's a scary thing sometimes to write these things down, but then to have others read it and to connect with me where I might be very unlike their own experience, that has meant so much. And so that scene represents that for me.
Thanks for that, Donna. Yeah, that's a really lovely explanation of that scene. So nice to hear from you on that. So one of the questions that we have, Donna, from Praveena V, a member of our audience, is what inspired you to write the book? And we know that you've talked about how it started off as a writing prompt where you had to rewrite a fairy tale of the Princess and the Pea. And that got you started with sort of working on a very initial draft of the story, but the story stuck with you. And it sort of improvised and built on it over the course of time. You worked with your editors, it went through multiple rewrites. At some point, you brought in Dreamers by Yugi Morales as a reference text. We love this picture book, but it's also such a gorgeous analogy of Petra and her brother Javier and her family's journey. But if you could tell us a little bit about your inspiration and the process of writing the book.
So when I was writing the book, I knew that I wanted Javier to have the same love of stories that Petra did. And for him, it was a picture book. But when I was writing the story, when I first started writing it, the book Dreamers didn't exist. It wasn't out yet. And so I kept trying different picture books, and they never felt quite right. And the book Dreamers represents people who are traveling or migrating and maybe are fearful, but are also hopeful for a new home, which is what Petra and her family are. They're afraid. They're afraid to travel to a new planet, but they're also hopeful for what is to come in their life. And when I read Dreamers for the first time, I said, oh, this is the book. This is the one that has to be here. But it's a little complicated. You have to get permission to use once a book is published. And when I was going to publish this book, the editor said, we have to get permission if you want to mention her book. And so we did. We went to Juji and her publisher and said, can we please use this book? And it's only a few sentences of her book that we use, but they're very powerful. It's a message, again, like the book, of hope and of migration. And I'm so happy that we were able to use it.
Yeah, it's an incredible addition to that book. It's such a nice connection also for all of us who've read Dreamers, and we see that connection come alive in your story.
So many people tell me that they're buying both books at the same time for that reason, and that makes me so happy.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. I hope members of our audience who've not read both books yet, please feel free to pursue this path. Mm-hmm. So for those of us, again, or for those of them in the audience who've not read the book yet, The Last Cuentista is the story of Petra Pina and her family who have to leave Earth, or who are chosen to leave Earth for life on a new planet, Sagan, because Earth is going to be hit by a comet which is likely to destroy all life on Earth. For Petra personally, it means leaving behind her grandmother, who she's intensely attached to and she loves so much. But also there's a question of her finding out who she is. She wants to be a storyteller. Mother's a botanist, her father's a geologist. Both of them want her to pursue science, but her heart lies in art. she goes to sleep she's put to sleep for a long 300-year period. And then when she wakes up, she finds out that everyone who matters to her is gone. All the things that matter to her no longer exist, because she wakes up to a planet and a civilization that believes in conformity rather than diversity. And so one of the things that we see, and so Petra turns to stories to make sense of her new world. And one of the things that we see Petra doing so well is that she turns the stories into, and she makes them her own. So God is referred to as she, it's princesses who save the day. And it's so nice to see, because fables and folktales sometimes tend to typecast women characters, which could possibly lead to a sense of feeling left out of the narrative. But when you were doing this through Petra in your story, did you feel like this was a way for you to claim these stories and make them your own? Not just for yourself, but for also readers who find themselves in the margins?
Yes. I think that when I was writing it, I said, wow, this is an opportunity as a storyteller. I can change the story into any way that I want to. And so I did that through Petra and made the stories how I think Petra would have told them. So yeah, when I was writing it, I decided I'm the one who gets to decide how these stories are told. And the word cuentista means storyteller, but it also has a connotation that maybe the storyteller isn't always telling you exactly the truth. And so that was one of the themes within this book. Even though these stories, many of them Petra had heard throughout time or from her grandmother as well, even she made them her own, and she changed them with what was going on in her environment, in her world. And it helped her to process what was going on in her surroundings. And I think that's a great tool that storytellers have, that depending on what's going on in the world, we can change the stories and make them our own to help us digest and to, kind of process again what's happening around us.
Lovely. We also have two questions from the audience, Donna, which is linked to the art of story and how your process was like. So Maushami Chaudhary, who's a teacher with New Academy, asks, what kind of research do you need to conduct before you begin writing your story? And we have a tied-in question from Shantanu Dattagupta, who asks, is the planet Sagan inspired by the astronomer Carl Sagan?
What a great question. Yes, I love when people know that that it was the name of the planet is from Carl Sagan. And I think that sometimes, again, as a writer, we get to give a nod to people who we respect and who we respect their work. So that was my nod to Carl Sagan. So thank you for noticing. There is a lot of research that goes into this. I had to make sure that the type of planet that I was describing was actually feasible. And as my background is in science, I had to study the science of a tidal locked planet and what that meant. When I first started writing the book, I felt I wanted something different than every other book with a meteor that hits Earth. And so Halley's Comet is one that revisits Earth every so often. And I wanted to show that this time around something happens. Well, what could happen? Well, Halley's Comet has an ice core. So I had to research what that meant. And yes, it could happen. If a solar flare hit Halley's Comet, it could melt some of the ice core and be nudged off path. So there was a lot of scientific research. There was also research into some of the stories. There were bits and pieces of the stories that maybe I had heard, but some of them I didn't know completely. And so I had to research and study and make sure that I was getting them right. And then once I had them right, then I can change them. It's oftentimes with fiction, whether it's a fiction, a planetary change that's entirely fiction, or a change to a story that's known folklore mythology, you have to start in truth and then you can make them your own.
That's some great writing advice, to start in truth. Donna, one of the things that struck me when I was reading the book, when I began reading it, the setting and the mention of the obsidian reminded me of The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, which is also a sci-fi fantasy. And also getting into Petra's head reminded me of the novel and the character Binti by Nadia Okorafor. I thought that it was interesting because both of these books, like yours, have strong female protagonists. They're both written by diverse authors. They both have storylines that pay tribute to the protagonist's past, their history of who they truly are and where they come from. But with genres like dystopia and sci-fi, especially among young readers today, there's a notion or an idea that these are genres that are exploring new and uncharted territory. So, how much resonance do you think the idea of bringing forth stories from the past to build the stories of the future has with readers of these genres?
I think that when you're reading within a genre like sci-fi or fantasy, even or something that's futuristic or dystopian, again, those things start with history, and because history repeats itself, even though there's a shift or you can change things, with your fiction. You can make up a new society or a new planet or a spaceship, but all of those things have a basis in history, and that's where stories come from. So even though we're writing them very futuristically, a lot of them come from the past. And so we're dealing with something in the United States right now where there's a lot of book banning going on, where books are being pulled off the shelves. And some of them are amazing and beautiful books. And so it doesn't seem to make sense. But when I was writing this book, when I was writing about the collective trying to erase stories and erase history, I didn't know what was going to be happening, 2 years later when my book was published, and that this was actually going to be our reality. So oftentimes when we think of, my book as being something set in the future, where we have the collective that is trying to erase history and erase books, I wasn't basing that on what was going on in the world right now. It's just what has happened throughout history. And so a lot of the stories that happen, writers in general, when we write fiction, yes, it's fiction, but there's a basis, whether it's something that happened 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. It can be truth or it can be folklore and mythology. We can't help but in our minds when we're writing, pulling from the past. And so I think that while we say, oh, these are futuristic ideas, oftentimes these are futuristic ideas that are 1,000 years old or 2,000 years old.
Yeah, we often read about how writing can be so prescient, and yet be a throwback to times past at the same time.
Very true.
So we have an interesting question that moves us from the past and the future to the present, from Lubena Bandukwala, who asks you, what does an award like the Newbery mean to you?
It seems like a simple question, but it's a very big question. When I was your ages, I would walk into my school library and they would have the Newbery books lined up on the shelf, and I would see the books and see the golden sticker, and I would think, oh, there's something more magical about those books. So to think that a child might walk into a library and see my books and see the sticker and think there must be something more magical it's just amazing for me. Some of the books I loved the most, I loved science fiction. And one of the last books that won the Newbery that was sci-fi was A Wrinkle in Time. And that was 50 years ago. And so many of the books, that I loved as a child, I have such respect for, and to think that mine is one of those, that's amazing. But the other part that means so much about this award is how it's connected me. It's connected me to places like a book festival in India. This is just amazing. This would never have happened. And I'm allowed to talk to kids all over, the United States and other countries. And so to me, that's a huge part of what this has meant for me.
Thank you for that very honest and very well articulated answer, Donna.
Thank you.
So we were also thinking about the fact that in the book, in The Last Cuentista, there seem to be a few binaries that are at work in the book. There's the idea of conformity versus diversity. There's the idea of the importance of art versus science. There's your bicultural heritage itself that feeds into the story and its writing. There's also this tiny connection that you're a practicing ophthalmologist and Petra has a condition with her vision in the book. And so how do you feel like your writer self and your physician self or your other non-writer self sort of work together as the story unfolded?
Well, I think because my background was in science, I was a biochemistry major. You can't help but have both parts of your right and left side of the brain. The science side meets the art side, and so much of what I have learned through science makes its way into my book. There's a lot of chemistry in this book, and so my poor editor, he said, "Are these real words?" And I said, "Oh yes, they're real words." So those things, I can't help but have them make their way into my book. What's interesting with Petra's eye condition, she has retinitis pigmentosa, which I did learn about in school. But when I was in school, I was looking in my mother's eye, practicing when my first year of graduate school, and I found little black flecks. And I said, "Those are not normal. What are those?" And so she came to my school and we diagnosed her with having retinitis pigmentosa. We didn't know that, but I did know my mom had something wrong with her vision the whole time that I was growing up. So I did use that in the book. So while I understood it from a scientific standpoint, I also understood it from a personal standpoint, and watching my mother, how she navigated her vision problems. But I will tell you, I also wanted to show that her vision impairment did not define her. Even though could be a challenge at times, she was so much more than just her vision problem. And that's the way I viewed my mother. It was one small part of her. And yes, it was a challenge, but it wasn't all of who she was.
That's a great way for us to think of Petra and her, for any of us who've not read the book yet. Something to keep in mind as we read. So Donna, just coming back to the appearance and the formatting of the book itself. So it's a hardcover, and there's the jacket, which has a cover design. And then there's the inside, yes, which has this other beautiful cover design, which shows us the fire snake Nagual, which is the comet that is referred to in the story. And there's the outside, which is more layered. It has elements from the book. Depicts two sides of possibly Petra, the protagonist herself, but also all of us as readers, which is designed by Rexine Maniquis, who's from the Philippines. And this was her first book cover. But could you talk us through how it is that there were two designs that came into the final product of the book?
I love this question. So oftentimes authors don't get to really contribute. The publisher decides on the artwork, but I was so fortunate because they let me look at some of the designs that were coming in from Rexine, and she did several. She had the fire snake, she had this one, and she had a few others, and most of them are pencil drawings. They start out just with sketches and ideas for that. And they had the fire snake illustration, but also the one that is on the cover or something similar to that. And we loved them both. And so my editor, who was so smart, said, "You know what? I think we can figure out a way to use them both." And while we thought that some people, because oftentimes people are afraid of snakes, and he thought that might not be the greatest thing for the cover. And so, but it was so beautiful that he decided to incorporate it inside under the jacket so people could still see this beautiful illustration. And so oftentimes what happens with cover artists is they'll do several illustrations and they just slowly narrow it down to the one that fits the book. And that's kind of what happened here. And then it's a long process deciding color and other things, and maybe adding one more element here and there. But like you said, there's so many bits and pieces of the book that I still look at it. And last week, someone pointed out something to me that I hadn't seen. And so all the time I look at it and see more and more detail that I hadn't noticed.
Excellent. That's like how the cover is telling the story itself.
It absolutely is. Yeah, it's very flattering and it's humbling when you see it for the first time and you say, wow, someone read my book and created something so beautiful.
That's lovely. So Donna, we're at 10:26 here in India, so we have 4 minutes left left to
Okay.
wrap up the session. So I think we'll do our last set of questions. Two connected questions, one from Praveena V from Parikrama and Sahakar Nagar, who says, were you attracted to storybooks from your childhood itself? And a related question for you from the NLF team on, do you have any advice for parents, librarians, teachers, or young readers in the audience who don't already think this on what one can make and one can do to make reading cool?
Well, I think as far as the books that I enjoyed as a child, I read everything in my school library. I read it all, but I always loved going to the things that were more fantastical or science fiction. I loved A Wrinkle in Time. I loved the Chronicles of Narnia. I loved reading Tolkien, The Hobbit, and those types of books. They helped me to escape. I felt I was from a small town and I wanted to go someplace bigger and more magical. And so all of those books helped me to do that. I think as far as if you look at a book and say, well, what would make a book seem more cool? I think the reader gets to decide what's cool. So oftentimes people will say, oh, books aren't cool, but I'll read a graphic novel. Well, I have news for you. A graphic novel is a book. And so if somebody says, well, I like comic books, those are books. And so oftentimes people think that something is not cool or that reading isn't cool. Reading is really cool. And there are so many different genres and books that you can read from. And you just have to kind of, search around and see what speaks to you. But I also think really importantly is once you find that thing and that's your thing, don't let anybody tell you it's not cool. That is for you to decide. And so I think that's really, it's important, and don't ever apologize for what you do like. So if somebody says, oh, you're reading sci-fi, that's not cool. Well, maybe to that person, it's not cool, but I would argue that you're way cooler than some other things that I might not think are cool. So it's in the eye of the beholder to decide what's cool and what's not cool.
Thanks so much, Donna. That's an excellent note to end our session. I hope that everybody in the audience has taken away some really interesting nuggets to think about. I hope that those who've not read the book yet will go ahead and pick up the book and read it themselves. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do this with us, Donna. It's been a very special half hour for us.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much, Donna.